All right, well, good to see you here tonight. We are back in chapter 21. I passed out chapter 22 because it's possible, maybe even highly likely, that we'll break into that chapter here tonight. If you don't have your questions from last week, you'll be at a slight disadvantage when I ask you answers. But if you have them, you're doing good. Thank you. Well, I just got the turn on the microphone. Fine. So, we actually left off at the end of verse 30. I'm going to back up and read 27 down to 30 just to remind us where we are, and then we're going to pick up in verse 31. And move forward. So, Paul went to Jerusalem. We remember that, right? And the brethren there, the elders and the apostles said, you don't have I'm paraphrasing, you don't have a great reputation here. Maybe you ought to do something to kind of calm down the people because there's some fear about you. And so they had him pay the expenses for 4 guys to do a vow. He went into the temple, and some Jews who had come down, most likely from Ephesus, the scriptures tells us Asia Minor, and there was a guy with him who was known to them to be an Ephesian, so that makes sense that I think that supports that conclusion. So, I'm going to pick up. When the 7th days were almost over, the Jews from Asia, upon seeing him in the temple, began to stir up all the crowd, and they laid hands on him. So they're getting people worked up. We don't like what we're seeing, and we're going to get people on our side. So they're stirring the people up, crying out, "Men of Israel, come to our aid. This is the man who preaches to all men everywhere against our people and the law in this place. Besides, he has even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with him, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Supposed. Then verse 30 says, "Then all the city was provoked, and the people rushed together, and taking hold of Paul, they dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut." So they dragged Paul out of the temple, and they closed the doors. It's suggested from the guys that are a lot smarter than I am that would be because the temple's now been defiled, allegedly, and so they've got to go through some ceremonial cleaning before they can open it back up. So Paul's outside now. And Paul really is gonna take a beating for his faith, so to speak, right? And that's one thing that we see about Paul. He's not one to back down. He's somebody that kind of walks the walk, talks the talk. He walks the talk, right? He doesn't tell you how you should live and what you should be doing and then do something different. He's actually in there. And it made me think, just a minute ago when Jace was praying, it made me think of Ro. I think there were a couple of comments at the funeral yesterday about her faith and her walk of faith. And even for the last 20 years, she's suffered from Parkinson's. And yet, on so many levels, you never saw her waver. She was here, when she was still driving, she was here when the doors were open. Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening. When she lost her ability to drive and she had to start relying on others, that changed a little bit. But the desire in her heart never changed. She wanted to be here. She wanted to be engaged in spiritual things. And that's really what we're seeing in Paul's life. He has a mission from the Lord, and he's going to carry it out. All right, any questions or comments as we get into this next little section here? All right, so in verse 30, I'm going to read this last little section, and then we'll go back and talk about it. So they've drug him out of the temple. They've shut the doors behind him. While they were seeking to kill him, a report came up to the commander of the Roman cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. And at once he took along some soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came up and took hold of him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains, and he began asking who he was and what he had done. But among the crowd, some were shouting one thing and some another, and when he could not find out the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. When he got to the stairs, he was carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob, for the multitude of people kept following them and shouting, "Away with him." As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness." But Paul said, "I am a Jew of Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city, and I beg you, allow me to speak to the people." And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand, and when there was a great hush, he spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect, saying, and then we're going to get into chapter 22. So, verse 31, while they were seeking to kill him, a report came up to the commander of the Roman cohort that was in Jerusalem, was all in confusion. What's a Roman cohort? Okay, a number of Roman soldiers, a pretty big number. Most of the people who are smarter than me say probably somewhere north of 600. 600 to 1,000. So a pretty big group of people this guy's in charge of. He's the commander, and this word for commander here is chiliarch, which means someone that's in command of 1,000 men. So he's a big deal. He would be like maybe a full bird colonel in the army, or maybe even a 1-star general, I don't know. But a pretty big group of people. So he's got some authority, he's got some clout. I find it interesting that he came himself. You know, in the modern military, a commander doesn't often go himself. He'll send a captain and maybe some sergeants and a bunch of soldiers to go down and check out what's going on.
I think because of the circumstances here, it probably dictated to him that he would have had to go, because when the city, the size of the city, and it's saying the whole city is in an uproar, you know, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And the Romans have had trouble with the Jews in the past, obviously, and so it seems to me that it was dictated, and the ESV uses the word tribune to describe him.
A what?
Tribune.
A tribune? Or okay, I didn't see that. Yeah.
That's what it uses.
What do any of you of the others of you have for that word instead of commander? Anybody have anything besides commander or tribune? I didn't notice that one in some of the word studies that I was doing. I'm guessing it's just another translation of that same Greek word, which means over 1,000 people. Okay, then in the next verse, so the boss is coming down to see what's going on. At once he took along some soldiers and centurions, and he ran down to them, and when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So now the commander, the chiliarch, shows up, and he's also got some centurions. That would be somebody that's in charge of 100 soldiers. So maybe that would be like a captain or maybe a sergeant major or something. What do you say, Rick? You're an Army guy. Captain. And we're not told exactly how many soldiers, but I'm going to say it would be a significant force. And so immediately they stopped beating Paul. So what do we know they were doing to Paul? They were beating him. And that goes back to what we saw back in Acts chapter 20, verse 23, when he was told, bonds and afflictions await you. Bonds and afflictions. So the idea of afflictions is going to be beatings, all kinds of suffering, that type of thing. Another part of what the Holy Spirit has said would happen to Paul when he comes to Jerusalem. All right, then in the next verse, any questions or comments there? Verse 33, then the commander came up and took hold of him, that's Paul, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains, and he began asking him who he was and what he had done. What do we remember about this idea of 2 chains? There was a prophecy earlier, Agabus. Yeah, he took his own belt and he tied his hands and his feet. And so again, we're seeing this is being fulfilled right here. He's bound with 2 chains. And so the commentators say one of those chains would have went around his hands and one of those chains would have went around his feet. And then he began to ask Paul, who are you and what have you done? Who are you and what have you done to cause all of this uproar, right? And isn't that kind of a natural inclination that we have when we see an event like that? Don't we just automatically think, oh, that guy did something bad? And that's kind of that's the conclusion he's drawn. There's something going on, and this guy has done something.
There's a reason why these folks are all...
Right.
He seems to be the center of attention.
Obviously, he's in the center of this melee, right? And there's things in our news pretty regularly. I saw a news feed today where some people that had been protesting some kind of an ICE deal were put in flexicuffs, like zip-tie handcuffs, and they were complaining because they were too tight. And my mind goes to, well, if you don't have a confrontation with law enforcement, you don't usually have to worry about getting put in handcuffs, and then it won't matter if they're tight or not. But
or file a complaint, and maybe they'll get looser, loose zip ties. That'll fit you better.
Maybe. I'm not sure that you can loosen the flexi cuff. You have to cut it off and start over. But so this is what's going on with Paul. Who are you and what have you done? All right, verse 33. And he's bound with 2 chains. Verse 34. But among the crowd, some were shouting one thing and some another, and when he could not find out the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. Now I have a picture up here on the screen. This is an artist rendition of what this barracks would most likely have looked like, and this was where all of these soldiers would have been housed, and they were taking them up away from the temple grounds into this structure to do their police work. This is called the castle or fortress of Antonia, which was the quarters for the Roman army stationed in Jerusalem. And again, this is just an artist rendition of it. Verse 35, when he got to the stairs, and we can kind of see the ramp there would be the stairs. He was being carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. So that tells you kind of how agitated and worked up they are. You can imagine a bunch of soldiers coming in. You would think people would maybe move back a bit. But this indicates to me that they didn't. The soldiers had to kind of pick him up and start packing him out of there in order to keep him from continue to get beat. And again, that just doesn't sound too much unlike what we see in the news at times today, when there's mob scenes, and sometimes people don't even know what they're riled up about. They just get caught up in a fray, and that's what happens. Verse 36, for the multitude of the people kept following them, shouting away with him. I want to back up just for a minute. Some were shouting one thing and some were shouting another. What does that kind of tell us?
They had no idea what
Yeah?
they were doing there. It was a mob.
Yeah.
It just-
We're making stuff up. Some people are shouting one thing, some people are shouting another thing. If it was really consistent, you would think, as somebody listening, maybe as a law enforcement officer, you would think, oh, this story jives. There's more credibility when a story matches, right? And less credibility when there's all kinds of different things being said. And so that seems to me a little bit about what's going on here too. There's not a lot of credibility because the stories don't match. And then how about this idea of away with him? I found that to be interesting too. Away with him. What does that mean? Where have we heard that before?
That's what they said with Jesus.
Yeah. And what were they saying really?
Kill him.
They want him
Yeah, kill him. That's the expression that is used often when you're saying kill the person. In Jesus' situation, it was crucify him. So really, this mob, they want their goal is to have Paul put to death. And I'm thankful that none of us that I know of have experienced this kind of persecution for our faith. Because who knows how good we would do, right? So then in verse 37, as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "Hey, may I say something to you?" And the commander responds, "Well, do you know Greek?" So it's an indication that Paul spoke to him in Greek. And so we know Paul's bilingual, or at least bilingual. Maybe he knows multiple languages. But it seems to be something that impresses or gets the attention of the commander.
He had already drawn a conclusion as to who he thought this might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because he thought maybe he was this Egyptian assassin agitator, right?
I guess Egyptians don't speak Greek. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not that Egyptian.
Well, they probably speak Egyptian. You walk like an Egyptian, you talk like an Egyptian, right?
You know, one of the things I think is curiosity, or what I thought was kind of cool about this, as soon as in his mind, he ruled out that he was this bad guy that he thought he was, his whole attitude toward it changed.
Yeah, I sense that in the narrative too. There seems to be a change in his demeanor.
Jewish leadership,
Mm-hmm.
even when they tried to prove, false agent, when they couldn't, they were still going to kill him no matter what.
The mob?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're riled up. Did you?
Could have been, it says Egyptian, but it could be a Jew from Egypt.
Sure.
Not just an Egyptian, because why would the Jews follow that guy? Alexandria had a huge Jewish community, probably almost equal to Jerusalem. So.
And so would you think those guys would also speak
I think it would be Coptic,
another language?
but probably he spoke Hebrew. He probably didn't speak Greek, he probably only spoke Hebrew.
Hmm.
That would be my guess.
All right. So in verse 38, then the commander says, "So then you're not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness." So that's a conclusion that he draws just because Paul is able to speak to him in Greek. Then in verse 39, then Paul says, "I am a Jew of Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city, and I beg you, allow me to speak to the people." Allow me to speak to the people. So he's appealing to the commander now to give him an opportunity maybe to address the crowd. And that's what we're going to see happens in the next chapter. And then in verse 40, where we're going to end in this chapter, it says, "When he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand." So, quiet down. That's kind of the idea. "And when there was a great hush, he spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect." So he's getting their attention. He's getting ready to address the crowd. The commander is going to allow this. Let's finish up our questions from the chapter 21 questions. I think we got through 5. So verse 6 was, question number 6 was, what were the false charges that some were making against Paul that were a concern to the leaders of the church in Jerusalem? There were 3 of them. He taught the Jews to forsake Moses. You don't need to circumcise your sons, and they don't walk according to the customs. What was suggested that Paul do to show that these charges were false?
That he paid for a ritual sacrifice.
Purify himself, pay the expenses for four guys. Okay. Why was Paul arrested by the Jews? Right. They alleged that he brought a Greek into the temple and defiled the holy place.
They laid their hands on him.
Yeah. The question that, huh?
It wasn't illegal.
Is it a trick question?
He wasn't arrested by the Jews, he was arrested by the Romans. The Jews laid hands on him and drug him out of town.
Okay. I'm looking back. I didn't write these questions, but I'm looking.
Gotta double check others' work.
Yeah.
It was basically, again, it was a mob that.
They took hold of Paul and dragged him out of the temple immediately. The doors were shut. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. I'll make a note of that. Let's see. What would be a better way to ask that question? Why was Paul seized by the Jews? Yeah. Taken into custody. Yeah. What were the Jews doing to Paul when the Roman commander and his soldiers came? Beating him. Does that to me that sounds, at least in my mind, like a pretty violent scene. Not like, a mild beating, but a pretty significant beating.
Yeah, and his concern is his first concern, once things get settled down, he's up at the top of the stairway, is to talk to what he calls his brethren, brothers and those. He's not concerned so much about the fact that he's probably bleeding, or that he's been beaten up. He's not concerned about his own welfare, his own safety at that point. He's concerned about getting the truth out to these brethren of his.
Yeah.
And because they need to know the truth, which is paramount in his mind.
Yeah. That is a good point. The last question then was, who did the commander think Paul might be when he first saw him, and what changed his mind? The Egyptian agitator? Okay. Now, how much of that are we going to remember? All of it, right? I mean, that's one of the benefits of going over this every few years, right? Because every time you go over it, you pick up something else. I don't know how many times I've read this. I never looked up the word chiliarch before. I was thinking commander. Okay, I get it. He's a boss. He's like a chief in the fire department, right? All right, now we're going to move into chapter 22. The chapter key for this verse is Paul's defense before the Jewish people. Let me read verses 1 through 6. Brethren and fathers. So Paul's, the commander's given him the right to speak. He's up at the top, we're going to say up towards the top of the stairs. He gets them to quiet down. He begins speaking to them in the language that they recognize. And I think Ron's note said that was most likely Jewish Aramaic. So he's going to begin speaking to them. Brethren and fathers. So he's calling on them, he's as a relative, really. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. And he said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prison, as also the high priest and all the council of the elders can testify. From them I also received letters to the brethren and started off for Damascus in order to bring even those who were there to Jerusalem as prisoners to be punished. But it happened that as I was on my way approaching Damascus about noontime, a very bright light suddenly flashed from the heaven all around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So, Paul's getting their attention. Brethren and fathers. Paul addresses his fellow Jews, appealing to their common heritage. And ironically, this is how Stephen began his defense in Acts chapter 7 and verse 2. On this occasion, however, Paul is not a persecutor, but he's the one that's being persecuted. Hebrew dialect. Paul could have spoken to them in Greek, but by using Hebrew, actually Jewish Aramaic, he was hoping they would identify with him more and be more receptive to his message. And that appears to be so because they even became more quiet once he began speaking. Then he kind of lays out his credentials. I'm a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are here today. So Gamaliel would be somebody that they would recognize as a teacher of the law, someone that was highly respected among the Jews. Maybe it would be like today saying, "Well, I got my degree from Yale, as opposed to North Idaho College. I studied under somebody that really was prominent in society, somebody that really was respected, that knew the law." It's really, Paul is he's trying to get them on board with what he's going to say, and he's making a good case, it would seem to me. He makes the claim that I was zealous for God, just as you all are today. And does that, when somebody says something like that, does that give us confidence? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that we could learn a lot from this because on how to approach people about spiritual things, is identify with the things that you have in common before you start trying to show areas where you don't have things in common.
Yeah.
But identify that we're in this together. Boy, we want to do this together.
And he offers them a compliment, right? Isn't it somewhat complimentary to say, that you're zealous? I know that you guys are zealous for God too.
We're on the same side.
Yeah. Good point, Becky. It is good, and sometimes we don't have a tendency to do that. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prison. When did Paul ever do that?
Well, for Stephen, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah. These things that Luke is reminding us of here are all things that we read earlier back in Acts, right? Right after Stephen, when Paul went to the elders and said, I need some letters. I'm really on fire to put down this uprising of people following Jesus, and I'm gonna be very active. I'm gonna travel and bring people back and throw them into prison, maybe even put them to death. Were you going to say something, Bruce?
Well, he's recounting for them, this is 20, 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's going to remind them, I think, that, and he was a Pharisee. Was he a son of a Pharisee as well? I think, I forget what he says in the Philippian letter, but he lays out all of his qualifications. And he
Yeah.
can just wake up one morning and just have completely lost his mind.
Yeah. And I think it goes to, he's building a case for credibility because he's getting ready to tell them some things that he knows they're going to be a little bit resistant to. And so right now he's trying to, I think, get them to be willing to listen. And we know at some point he's going to say something, and at that moment they're going to cut him off because it's just too much for them to consider. So I persecuted the way. What's the way? Okay, the followers of Jesus is referred to as the way at times. And now he says, as also the high priest and all the council of the elders can testify. So some of the people that were here would have been people from 25 years ago that knew Paul when he was a younger man, members of the council, because I received letters from them to go out and in order to bring even those who were in Damascus to Jerusalem as prisoners to be punished. And then he's going to go into his conversion, really, when he encountered the Lord on the road to Damascus. Starting in verse 6, but as it happened, I was on my way approaching Damascus about noontime. A very bright light suddenly flashed from heaven all around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, well, who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus the Nazarene, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me saw the light, to be sure, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, get up and go into Damascus, and there you will be told of all that has been appointed for you to do. Verse 6, this information was not given in Acts 9, so the account is slightly different, but later in Acts 26, verse 13. Paul will add that the light was brighter than the sun. So this is a bright light that shines. In verse 6, he fell to the ground. He heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And then, of course, the Lord answers, I'm Jesus the Nazarene, whom you are persecuting. So again, Paul is telling this mob about his conversion. Let's see here. In verse 9, those who were with me saw the light, to be sure, but did not understand the voice of one who was speaking to me. They saw the light, but they did not see the Lord. They did not understand the voice. They heard a voice, but they did not understand it. Whether they even recognized the noise that they heard as a voice, we're not sure. The one thing that we are sure of is that they comprehended no message from what they heard. Only Saul or Paul heard what the Lord was saying. Again, verse 10, and I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, get up, go into Damascus, and there you will be told of all that has been appointed to you to do. But since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me, and I came into Damascus. A certain Ananias, a man who was devout by the standard of the law and well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, came to me, and standing near said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very time I looked up at him. And he said, the God of our fathers has appointed you to know this, to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear an utterance from his mouth. For you will be a witness for him to all men of what you have seen and heard. Now, Why do you delay? Get up and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. It happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple that I fell into a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste, get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Okay, so back in verse 10, he says, what shall I do? Get up, go into Damascus. There you're going to be told of what you shall do. The answer here is slightly different wording, but it means the same thing the same thing as the response in Acts 9, verse 6. He was instructed to go into the city, and he would be told what to do. And what did we see that he was told to do? Do we remember from the earlier account? Do we remember what he was told to do?
He was told he didn't, I don't think that the identity of Ananias was given at that point, but he was told by Ananias to get up and be baptized.
Right.
The thing that's interesting to me here is that Jesus takes this persecution very personally. But see, they weren't, I mean, Jesus was out of the picture, obviously, having gone back to heaven. And he wasn't there in a personal contact. But when Saul was persecuting Jesus' disciples, they were persecuting Jesus.
Right.
And that's a huge distinction. I mean, you know, Jesus put it like this. I think he said, many will, basically, they'll be helping Jesus, giving him something to drink and so on, when they do that for his people, for his disciples. And, you know, when do we ever see you without clothing or something?
Right.
As much as you do to one of mine, you've done it to me. It's a very personal thing.
Yeah. And so is the same thing happening today for people that are actually being persecuted for their faith? Is Jesus concerned about them? Oh, absolutely. Should we be concerned about them too then? Yeah. When we hear of or know of brethren that are suffering, do we have a responsibility to take some action to the best of our ability? Whether it's, you know, when we see hurricanes happening or devastating fires that come through, to the ability that we have the means, are we sometimes motivated to get involved in that and help in some way? Often than not, it's a financial way, right? I know I've read a number of articles about brethren that will, haul truckloads of supplies or house people who lose their homes and those kinds of things. It seems like we don't get a lot of opportunities for that here, or maybe there are opportunities and our eyes aren't open. I don't know.
We're a little bit remote here.
Yeah, we are, but still things do happen, right? I think it's important for us to keep our eyes open, to look for opportunities to be able to serve in that way. All right, let's see, where were we? Okay, certain Ananias, a man who was devout by the standard of the law, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, came to me, standing near, said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very time I looked up at him. So he received his sight right then. That would be a miracle. And then he said, the God of our fathers has appointed you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear an utterance from his mouth. I think that's a reference to when Jesus was caught, or when Paul was caught up into the third heaven and had a conversation with the Lord. And he said, let's see, for you will be a witness for him to all men of what you have seen and heard. Why do you delay? This showed this verse 16. Now, why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, wash away your sins, calling on his name. This shows the urgency of Paul doing what was needed in order the urgency of Paul doing what was needed to be done. And so once we are aware of God, of what God wants us to do, we need to do it as soon as possible as well. And isn't that kind of what we do when we teach a Bible study or conversion type class? We're going through the scriptures, we're guiding somebody through the steps of conversion, and eventually we arrive at, and I remember when our conversion study was to the point that it came to, we're like, we need to go get baptized. And I think that's really the conclusion that we all hope everyone comes to when we're having a conversion study with them.
How long did you wait before you were baptized? From the time you became convicted of your sin until you were actually baptized? Was it like right away, or was it some time?
Well, so we were involved in a series of classes, but we came right then. I mean, we were in the study, and I don't even remember right at the moment what it was, but when we said those words, like, well, we need to get baptized, they're like, well, let's go.
It was nice. And we
It
loaded
was,
up
yeah,
our
it was,
kids
it
in the
was,
car
it was dark. It was after dark.
and right down.
And we drove down here, and, we didn't even have cell phones back then, but somehow there were 10 or 12 people here by the time we got here. Three or four families.
Smoke signals, I mean.
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, we had a landline phone. We were actually at a party line at our house. So I don't know how they figured it out.
Somebody called.
And people, I think the people that did come lived close by, the Vaughns and the Crums and of course the Weeks and the Thompsons were at our house studying with us. So, and Barney Cargile was here. That's one of those days you don't ever forget, right? I think it was the first time I'd ever heard a cappella singing also. So, why delay, right? Once you come to the conclusion, when you realize that's what you need, take action. All right, verse 17. Happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple that I fell into a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste, get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves understand that in one synagogue after another I used to imprison and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed, I also was standing by approving and watching out for the coats of those who were slaying him. And he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. They listened to him up to this statement, and then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from this earth, for he should not be allowed to live. So this was the turning point for them. And I'm not sure that I understand totally why. What was it about this statement in particular that just shut them off, closed their minds?
I think it indicates the level of hatred, just absolute hatred that they had for the Gentiles. We said this before, but the Gentiles in the eyes of the Jews were dogs, and they didn't deserve to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a man, even though he's being sent by the Messiah to evangelize the Gentile world, they're wanting to have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, so everything was pretty good. Like, I'm persecuting the way I was doing all this stuff, and maybe you could see them kind of... Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a burn, right? Like, God told me, they won't listen to you. Go to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's exactly what they're upset at him about already, is so he brought the Gentiles into the temple.
Mm-hmm.
But what God's saying is, the temple is it gonna do you any good? Go out to the pagans, teach them, because my people aren't gonna listen. You know, and it really is a burn.
Mm-hmm.
It's like God saying, you guys won't listen to me anymore.
And it's the people that are right there, hearing
The ones
hearing
who are
it.
zealous for the law, like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean we're not gonna listen?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, everything was good until the word Gentile came out, right? So they listened to him up to this statement, and then they raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live." Which goes right back to what they were saying in the beginning. Away with him. Away with him. He's a bad guy. And as they were crying out, throwing off their coats and tossing dust into the air. So again, you just see this seems petty to me, you know.
I think that's the name of the manager of the New York Yankees. When he got kicked off, he went out there and he.
Oh yeah, Lou
I can't remember his.
Lou somebody.
The guy that was.
No, it wasn't Pinella.
Oh, it wasn't?
Anyway, he was known for this.
Yeah.
He go out, go out there and kick dirt all over the umpire.
Kick it.
This was totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Martin.
So again, they're starting to make a scene again, right? They're crying out, they're tossing their coats, and they're throwing dirt into the air. It seems like a temper tantrum to me.
Really a bad gospel meeting. I mean, really a bad gospel
Yeah.
meeting. He's not getting the reaction at all that he wants.
Hey, there's not going to be any converts.
We're talking lynching here.
So then in verse 24, the commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks, stating that he should be examined by scourging so that he might find out the reasons why they were shouting against him in that way. So the commander has now seen Paul make his speech. He's seen the reaction of the crowd. He sees what happens when he gets to the end of his preaching. And then he orders him to be brought into the barracks and to be examined by scourging. How do you examine someone by scourging?
Or else.
Yeah. So, yeah, examined by scourging. That's not like, that's a hands-on examination, right? What is scourging? Do we remember what scourging is from when we see the Lord being scourged?
Usually with small chunks of metal at the ends.
Metal, sometimes bone. At the end of it sounds like a fairly short, maybe 16 to 18, maybe 24 inches long, but multiple strings with something that is designed to tear muscle and flesh, and doesn't sound like anything anybody would want to experience, right? Oh yeah. Yeah, I know that's I've heard people make that point sometimes during the Lord's Supper talk, that that it was not uncommon for someone to just die as a result of a scourging. So the plan is to examine Paul by scourging. But when they stretched him out with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?" So now the brakes come on. He's stretched out in order to get going with this examination, and Paul makes a statement that really puts the brakes on and stops what they're about to do to him. Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? The next verse says, when the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman." So why would that be a big deal?
They had laws. The Romans had very strict laws
Yeah.
on actual citizens.
So he's not just a Jew, right? Because if he was just a Jew, there would have been no reason to stop. But he is a Roman citizen. Then the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" And he said, "Yes." So Paul answers, "Yeah, I'm a Roman." The commander answered, "I acquired this citizenship with a large sum of money." And Paul said, "But I was actually born a citizen." Why is that a big deal? Why do you suppose Luke tells us this?
I'm not real sure, unless being born in the society carried more weight than if you bought your way in.
Well, is it kind of, do we have kind of that attitude today? Don't we sometimes hear people, well, I was born in, I mean, we do it for the Idaho is full guy, right? Mike? Right? We do that for you. Like I was born here, right? I'm a native. I'm an Idaho native. Anybody that's not a native is inferior to me. And so, and in our nation, we kind of have the same attitude, right? Well, I was born an American. Oh, but I immigrated here. Even though now you're a citizen, but there just seems to be a stigma. There's nothing. I'm not saying there's anything legitimate about it, but that's sometimes the way we approach things. We feel like, oh, we're just a little bit better, maybe.
Well, and weren't the Romans like really interested in like classification of people? You would think that Paul being, born as a Roman would put him in a higher class than everybody else around them.
It would seem to me that that's probably an underlying thing here, right? Because the commander's question is, well, how'd you get your citizenship, really? I bought mine, how'd you get yours?
My note says that being a citizen by birth was especially prestigious.
Mm-hmm. The notes from our lesson says that there were evidently 3 ways that a person could legally acquire Roman citizenship. Conferred by the Senate for meritorious conduct would be one. Inherited from a father who was a citizen, and automatically given those who were born in a city that had been granted the status of a free city by Rome. Many people illegally gained citizenship through bribery, and that appears to be how the commander received his. He paid a sum of money in order to get it. Therefore, verse 29, therefore those who were about to examine him immediately let go of him, and the commander also was afraid when he found out that he was a Roman, and because he had put him in chains. So, not only were they getting ready to beat somebody that was a Roman citizen, which would be against the law unless there had been a trial, but even putting him in chains was a problem for him. And so then let's just finish this up. We got one verse left. But on the next day, wishing to know for certain why he had been accused by the Jews, he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the council to assemble and brought Paul down and set him before them. So now we're going to have something like a trial or an inquiry. We want to get some more information. And we already know what the disposition is of the Jewish leaders. They're not happy at all with Paul. But at the end of this chapter, the commander arranges for Paul to appear before the Sanhedrin Council, hoping to find out exactly what it is that Paul has done, or is being accused of anyway, so that he can figure out how to deal with it moving forward. Any questions or comments through that chapter? All right, let's close with a prayer.